With the 2021 NHL Seattle Expansion Draft taking place later today, everyone is in for a bit of a roller coaster of a draft. Ron Francis has made so many contradicting comments over the past couple of months that no one can be sure exactly how the Kraken will go about selecting one player from every NHL team. Except for the Golden Knights, of course, because, they're just the NHL's favorite team. So just before we hop into this, if you guys haven't yet, make sure to go down below, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and hit that notification bell to never miss when these videos come out. And also, I would like to give a quick shout out to Drayden Pletz for the comment and the video idea. I have seen a bunch of these mock drafts, but I was on the fence whether or not I was going to jump in on this type of video. But we're doing it. And another shout out to Cap Friendly, of course, for the mock draft that you guys are about to see on screen. Alright, so here we are on Cap Friendly, guys, and as you can see right at the top of the screen, we've got all our requirements. But before we really go into this, let's go over the rules quickly. So the main rules for this expansion draft are: 1, that the Kraken have to select 30 players, 1 from every single NHL franchise except for the Vegas Golden Knights. Rule 2 is that they must select a minimum 14 forwards, 9 defensemen, and 3 NHL goaltenders. The other rule is that 20 of the 30 players selected must have a contract for the 2021-22 season. So this means that RFAs and UFAs do not apply to this. And the final rule is that their cap hit must end up between $48.9 million minimum and $81.5 maximum for the cap. So here we go. Let's get started with it. And for the first team, we have the Anaheim Ducks. So I've gone over multiple mock drafts here, but in my opinion, it comes down to about 3 or maybe 4 players that Seattle could be selecting from Anaheim. Those players would be Adam Henrique, Sonny Milano, maybe Alexander Volkov, but I'm going to go personally with Hayden Fleury. He's not an RFA until 2022, and I think he would be a really good defensive pickup. He was a 7th overall pick back in 2000 and I want to say 14, but it might be 16 as well. Moving on to the Arizona Coyotes now. The Coyotes don't have quite as much to offer when it comes to the expansion draft, but they do have a pretty darn good goalie sitting there in Antti Raanta. He is expiring and he is 32 years old, so not the most likely candidate for the Kraken to select. Instead, I think they'll go with a slightly younger player again in Christian Fischer. Again, not a restricted free agent until 2022. They get a year of him playing on a $1 million contract before the Kraken would actually have to sign him. So I think Christian Fischer would be a great pickup for them. They might also end up going with a guy like, Cam Dineen, or maybe if they want Raanta, they'll go with him. Besides that, not a whole lot to offer from the Arizona Coyotes. After that, we have the Boston Bruins, and the Bruins surprisingly aren't losing that much or giving up that much in this expansion draft. The worst case scenario for them would probably be Taylor Hall getting picked up, which I could see happening. I don't honestly think it will happen. I think they'll go with a slightly younger and cheaper player in Andre Kasha. That is my personal opinion. They could go with Jeremy Lauzon as well, or maybe if they really feel like it, they could go with Tuukka Rask. But I think Kasha or Lauzon or maybe 1 or 2 other players could be on the Kraken's radar, but overall, I think Kasha is probably their safest bet. Even though he is a restricted free agent, I think he would want the opportunity to go and play in a slightly bigger role for a team like Seattle. Moving on to the Buffalo Sabres, we really don't have a lot here to look at from a Seattle perspective. They could go with a goalie like Carter Hutton. Doesn't really make sense. There really aren't a ton of options. Seattle's protected most of their big names, but I think a guy that could, kind of fly under the radar for some teams, and Buffalo fans would definitely know of this guy. William Borgen, just 24 years old. He is a restricted free agent this year as well, but he definitely has room to grow. He could probably grow into a, bottom pairing type defenseman at least, and Seattle's probably going to pick up a couple younger guys. I've heard that they were going to try and maybe get some old veteran experience like Giordano, or maybe Carey Price, players like that, and then flip them after a year kind of thing, or at the deadline, to potentially make some good trades and bring in some prospects for the future. But overall, I think William Borgen would be probably their best option from the Buffalo Sabres. Moving on to the Calgary Flames now. Calgary has got a couple interesting options, and like I said, Giordano very well could be the defenseman that they go with. Forward-wise, Calgary has protected a lot of their better forwards, and there's not too many options there for Seattle, but I think the guy they're going to go with, again, a younger player, lots of room to grow still, and he is a restricted free agent, but I think Oliver Kylington would be a fantastic pick for them. A more offensively minded defenseman on that left side, but Kylington, again, drafted in the first round and just has a lot of room to grow still. Doesn't have the highest of ceilings in this draft, but I think he's up there defensively for an expansion player that could be picked up. And I mean, it's too bad Calgary didn't protect him, but if they had left Tanev exposed, Tanev would probably be going to the Kraken. So I think Kylington is Seattle's best option from the Flames. After Calgary, we have the Carolina Hurricanes up next, and Carolina is an interesting one because they do have a lot of options here. A lot of players are unrestricted free agents or heading into unrestricted free agency. One thing I did find when I went through the draft was that I did tend to draft a lot of defensemen. As you can see, we've drafted more defensemen than forwards up at the top of the screen right here. But at the current moment, I do think that Jake Bean is definitely on their radar over guys like Hamilton or Gardner, because those guys are more likely going to, walk in unrestricted free agency. But between Jake Bean, the other guy I think they could be quite interested in would be Morgan Geekie. He's just 22 years old, doesn't hit restricted free agency until 2022, so he's got another season left before, again, the Kraken would have to sign him. And he does have a younger brother, I believe it's Connor Geekie, coming into the NHL in the next season or two. I believe he's draft eligible in 2022. So that could be something interesting. If the Kraken have a higher pick, they could get the Geekie brothers together. And I honestly think Morgan Geekie would be a great pick for them as well, to be a depth center that could grow into a higher role if he develops well. But don't get me wrong, Jake Bean would be a great pick for them as well, or maybe even a guy like Mrazek if they can agree to terms with him. There's so many options in Carolina that really you could take a look at it from many different angles for the Seattle Kraken. Moving on to the Chicago Blackhawks now. Chicago doesn't have nearly as many players to protect. They haven't made a ton of moves, and they've been able to protect their main core of players overall. But looking through the players available, Adam Gaudette definitely is one of those players that could end up getting picked up by the Kraken if they're interested enough in him. But I think their best options would be between Calvin DeHaan, who has a year left on his $4.5 million contract there, or a 4-year younger Nikita Zadorov. And Zadorov, however you say his name, has been an absolute defensive beast for not just the Blackhawks, but the Colorado Avalanche before he was moved in the offseason last year. And honestly, I think bringing in a big-bodied, mean defensive defenseman like that would seriously help to protect some of the Kraken's forwards that I think they're going to draft. And as long as they can agree to around a $4 million contract with Zadorov, then they should be fine taking him from the Blackhawks. Moving on next to the Colorado Avalanche. Obviously, the biggest storyline in Colorado is that Gabriel Landeskog does not want to stay with the team for anything under $8.5 to $9 million, which is too bad because Nathan MacKinnon has totally bought into that mindset of, I want to win here, I will take less money to win here, and then Landeskog goes off and as the captain of the team. Honestly, he's not showing the best leadership qualities out of Colorado right now, but Landeskog goes, oh, you got to pay me more, otherwise I'm going to explore the unrestricted market. And honestly, it's kind of just disappointing. I had a higher opinion of Landeskog before this offseason, and seeing how he's dealt with this Colorado situation and not taking $1 million less kind of thing, just kind of dampened my opinion on the guy. But don't get me wrong, he's still a great player. Seattle could try to select him and agree to terms with him. Maybe he's interested in that, but honestly, there's been lots of reports that Landeskog is interested in going anywhere but Colorado at this point. But personally, I think instead of Seattle trying to take on an $8 to $9 million cap hit for Landeskog, don't get me wrong, he's 28, he's going to be great wherever he goes, but I think they would be better off taking a guy like JT Compher at $3.5 million for the next 2 seasons. I think Compher is a steal. He can slot right into their third line, maybe even up to the second if he starts playing really well, and would be a great fit for the Seattle team overall. Other players to watch would probably be guys like maybe Matt Calvert or Brandon Saad, but really not a ton of options available in Colorado. Moving on to the Columbus Blue Jackets now, and there's really only 2 or maybe 3 guys that I could see Seattle being extremely interested in. Guys like Dean Kukan or maybe Gabriel Carlson could get selected, but in my opinion, I think they have to go with Max Domi, especially since he has a year left on that $5.3 million contract. And, again, Domi's one of those players that they could end up flipping at the deadline if they don't trend as high as they want to and, end up in a playoff position by the deadline. That's definitely something I could see Seattle trying to pull off and maybe getting some higher end assets back in exchange for Domi. Who knows how it's going to go, but I do honestly think that they will select Max Domi from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Moving on now to the Dallas Stars, and Dallas has some interesting players exposed. Ben Bishop, obviously coming off of injury, is 34 years old now and is probably going to ask for more than a $4.9 million contract for his extension once he hits unrestricted free agency in the next 2 seasons. But overall, there's no guarantee that Bishop is the guy to go with, because who's to say he actually returns to his goaltending form he was at with the Dallas Stars, last year when they went on their cup run. In my opinion, there's a couple different guys they could go with, but I am focusing mainly for this pick on the 2021/22 contracts, and I think just a solid contract to bring in would be Joel Hanley. A depth defenseman, not really going to play a ton of minutes, but could slot into a bottom pairing role if needed, if there's injuries, and of course could play in the AHL as well, and probably isn't going to be a huge target for a lot of teams to pick up off of waivers if he is moving back and forth. Besides that, Vatanen, UFA, Olesiak, UFA, those guys are great defensemen, but I just don't think Seattle's going to want to try and take on their unrestricted free agents. They're not going to want to take on too many. They're going to want to take on guys that they're pretty much sure of that they're going to get through signings. Moving on to Detroit, the Red Wings, again, don't have a ton to offer. There are certain players like Nemesnikov or maybe Evgeny Svechnikov who could be players that Seattle would be interested in, but I think they're going to go with Troy Stecher, a UFA in 2022. I think he'd be a great pickup for their team again. Moving on to the Edmonton Oilers now, and really what the reports have said is it comes down to 2 or 3 guys. It doesn't sound like the Seattle Kraken are too interested in any of Edmonton's defense. Maybe William Lagesson, but overall I think they are either going to go with Jujhar Khaira, Dominic Cahoon, or Tyler Benson, and in this case I think Benson is the pick, especially if he can develop into a middle 6 winger. Especially at 23 years old, I think he is probably going to be a great player for the Kraken as long as he develops properly. And as an Oilers fan, I am, sad to see him go, but I expect the Kraken to most likely take Tyler Benson. On to the Florida Panthers now, and really there aren't a ton of options here. Everybody that I've watched a mock draft on, all the reports I've seen, pretty much all seem to point towards the Kraken selecting Chris Driedger. And yes, he is an unrestricted free agent, but overall, I think Seattle will definitely be able to get him signed up, and he's not going to be, a $2.5 to $5 million cap hit. I think he'll be right around that $2 million mark. And at 27 years old, Driedger's definitely got some time to develop still and prove that he could be a starting caliber goalie in the NHL. I think he really was close this season anyways with the Florida Panthers. So now moving on to the LA Kings, and the Kings have got a couple different interesting players exposed. Martin Furt, Carl Grundstrom, Athanasiou, even maybe Jonathan Quick, but Quick's too much money, obviously, and the Kraken would not take on a 35-year-old goalie at $5.8 million. That isn't really even starting caliber anymore. I think personally that they're going to go with Cale Clegg. He's put up some pretty solid numbers as a 23-year-old when given the opportunity, and again is one of those picks that I could see the Kraken potentially growing into a top 4 type of role down the road. Moving on to the Minnesota Wild, there's only a couple guys I could honestly see them selecting. Maybe a guy like Ian McCoshen. I think Nick Bjugstad is definitely on their radar at a $2 million cap hit. He would not be a bad center by any means, but I think their most likely player to select would be Kaapo Kähkönen. He really proved himself to be a potential starting caliber goaltender this year with the Minnesota Wild. He played quite well throughout the regular season. Of course, Cam Talbot took over in the playoffs, but I could definitely see the Kraken selecting Kähkönen with this pick. Moving on to the Montreal Canadiens now, and the Canadiens honestly have one of the most interesting unprotected players lists in the entire NHL. Carey Price, Shea Weber, Jonathan Drouin, Thomas Tatar, Paul Byron, Philip Deneau, even Eric Staal. These guys were all quite critical in their Stanley Cup Finals run this year, but injury reports have come out for Weber and Price, so I really don't see the Kraken going for either of those guys. I think it's a bit of a toss-up between guys either like Cale Fleury if they want to go with a younger player, Philip Deneau if they're really looking for that two-way type of center, maybe Thomas Tatar, but I honestly think they're going to pick up Jonathan Drouin here. He's got 2 years left on a $5.5 million contract, and to be completely honest with you, I think Drouin would be a great fit in Seattle. He definitely needs a bit of a fresh start, considering how ruthless the Montreal fans were to him in his stint there, but we'll see what happens with the Canadiens' unprotected list. Moving on to the Nashville Predators, I think, there are a couple interesting players in here. They could go with a younger guy like Jakob Trenin, or maybe a guy along the lines of Frederick Allard, or maybe even Matt Benning. But personally, I think they might splurge here and go for one of these big contract players in either Johansson or Duchesne. Personally, I think they'd take the risk on Duchesne. I think they'd be looking for that top-end kind of center, and really, I don't think they would be any worse off from it. He is on a bigger deal. He's got about 5 years left still on that contract, but if they can get Duchesne into top caliber form, which he showed flashes of throughout his career, if they can get him onto that type of form consistently, they will have made a great pick from the Predators. Moving on to the New Jersey Devils, there are definitely a few interesting players in here that they could go and select. Maybe a guy like Nathan Bastian, Nick Merkley, even Andreas Janssen, but their defense is quite interesting for the top three here. Ryan Murray, PK Subban, and of course Will Butcher. I think Subban's a bit too much money, and they probably won't go with him unless, he's one of their main target players. I think Will Butcher would be a much more realistic type of draft pick for them, and at 26 years old with 1 year left on a $3.8 million deal, he can definitely slot into a top four position for the Kraken, and again, it's a prove-it-to-me type of contract for Will Butcher. Now on to the New York Islanders. The Islanders have a few pretty solid players exposed in this draft. Players by the names of Jordan Eberle, Josh Bailey, even Kyle Palmieri, or maybe Richard Panik if you consider him to be on that same kind of level. I think Palmieri, Eberle, and Bailey are all up there for, top 6 wingers. But I think from the Islanders that the Kraken will probably try to select a younger player, and honestly the youngest player available, apart from Parker Witherspoon, I think they'll go with Kiefer Bellows, and again an RFA, but if they can get him signed up to a decent deal, he could be an impact player in the future for the Kraken. On to the New York Rangers now, and the Rangers don't have nearly as many players exposed that are high-end, high-caliber type players, but I do think for this pick, it could come down to either Ty Ronan or Julien Gauthier. I don't think they'll go with Tony DeAngelo again just because of those dressing room, locker room issues that came out over the media the last couple of years. I think Julien Gauthier, a bigger body type winger, would be a great selection for them, and he's got, again, another year left before he hits restricted free agency and has one of those prove-it-to-me contracts. So now on to the final 10 teams of this draft, and with the Ottawa Senators pick for the Kraken, I think it comes down to 2 main players, and I'm not sure, honestly, who they're going to go with. I think Matt Murray would be a great starting caliber selection. Same type of player as, Marc-Andre Fleury. He's got 3 years left on his deal at $6.2 million. It's nothing crazy for a starting caliber goalie. And Matt Murray, again, had a pretty good season with the Senators overall this year. He was playing in a weaker division, but I think they'll go with Murray. The only other player I could see the Kraken selecting would maybe be Vitaly Abramov, again from the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was a pretty solid pick for them and came over in, I believe it was the Ryan Zingle deal, but I might be wrong on that. Anyways, Abramov would be the only other player I could see the Kraken selecting from the Senators. Now on to the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers have quite a few interesting players exposed. A couple big money deals with James Van Riemsdyk or Jakub Voracek. As well as, Shane Gostisbehere. Not exactly cheap, but I do think that Gostisbehere could be one of those selections where the Kraken are like, yeah, let's try him out. $4.5 million. We've got $82 million in cap space about. Gostisbehere could just be needing a change of scenery, and maybe the Kraken are the best place for him to go. Besides that, Nolan Patrick would have been the guy where it was like, yes, they're going to take him, but doesn't seem like that since the trade happened a couple days ago, and I think Gostisbehere will be the Flyers, or the Kraken selection from the Flyers. Now moving on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I can't say this is a unanimous pick because the Kraken still might end up going with a guy like Zach Aston-Reese, Brandon Tanev, or Marcus Pettersson, but I think that they are going to select Jason Zucker. Again, 2 years left on his deal at $5.5 million is nothing crazy. Same type of contract as Jonathan Drouin, except Drouin is younger, so Zucker, again, should be a very good player if the Penguins select him here, and could probably use the change of scenery as well. I know Pittsburgh only made it to round 1 of the playoffs this year, and I'm sure Zucker would like to go a bit farther after playing so many years with the Minnesota Wild as well. Moving on now to the San Jose Sharks, and I really think it's a pretty clear selection from San Jose. They do have a couple younger players, but Dylan Gambrell seems to just be that player where it's like he could really turn out to be a solid top 6 type of center, one of those two-way guys that can play power play minutes as well as penalty kill, and can just do everything overall. I think Gambrell would be a great selection for the Kraken, and at just 24 years old, he's got tons of room to grow still. Now moving on to the St. Louis Blues, and the Blues have had, again, one of the most interesting off-season stories going here, with Vladimir Tarasenko coming back from shoulder injuries and surgery, and of course gets exposed in the draft. I think he's the clear selection. I think the Kraken have nothing to lose on this pick, and he's got 2 years left. I don't think they're going to be in a crazy cap crunch right off the bat, but they could try to go with a guy like Jaden Schwartz, Sammy Blais, maybe even Zach Sanford or Mike Hoffman as well. or Vince Dunn. Vince Dunn, an RFA there, definitely could be selected by the Kraken, but I think Tarasenko is going to be that top caliber type player or winger and sniper that the Kraken are looking to select if they can get him. Moving on now to the Tampa Bay Lightning, the defending Stanley Cup champions, two-time back-to-back Cup champions, I will say. I think that their selection is going to consist of, well, it comes down to a few different guys. Andre Palat, Yanni Gourde, Tyler Johnson, all bigger contracts, but all proven NHLers at this point. A guy like, Boris Kachuk or Taylor Radish could get selected if the Kraken are looking to build a younger team. Of course, Cal Foote would probably be the selection they go with if they're looking for young players, but I think they're going to personally go with Yanni Gourde. I think Gourde has got, a pretty good contract left. He's still got 4 years on that deal at $5.1 million, and he can definitely play a top 6 center role if he's put in the right spot. But again, I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments for who you think the Kraken are going to be selecting from each team. Now on to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I think it really only comes down to 2 or maybe 3 players here. I don't think they'll be going with Galchenyuk because he's going to want more money. Alex Kerfoot, same kind of deal. He's a bit expensive, but I could see the Seattle Kraken signing Travis Dermott to a 1 or maybe 2 year deal if they are interested in bringing in a younger defenseman. I think this would be a great draft pick for them, and I think the Leafs are honestly missing out by letting Dermott go. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks, and the Canucks don't have anything crazy going on their roster. I could only see them selecting 2 or maybe 3 different players here, and although they very well could go with Cole Lind, I think Virtanen is another one of those players where it's like he could be good on a new team. 1 year left on his deal as well, another prove-it-to-me player, and I think Virtanen could really use the change of scenery, even though he would still get to play against the Canucks a lot if he is drafted by the Kraken. On to our second last team of this draft now, we have the Washington Capitals. And with the Capitals, I think it really only comes down to a couple players. They have a lot of older players on this team. I could see Lucas Johansson potentially getting selected, or maybe a guy like Brendan Dillon. I don't think Schultz, Ovechkin, or any of those guys will get selected as UFAs. The guy I could see getting selected from the Capitals would be Connor Sheary. I think Sheary has a lot to prove. He is 29 years old, but he's got 2 years left on his deal at $735K, and I think that's a great deal for the Kraken. The only other player they could potentially select is maybe Vitek Vanacek, but we'll see. And with the last team of the expansion draft, or my mock expansion draft for the Seattle Kraken, we have the Winnipeg Jets. And with the Winnipeg Jets selection here, it could go to maybe Tucker Pullman or Eric Comrie or Mason Appleton, but I think the Kraken are going to select Dylan DeMello with this pick. I think DeMello can really fill out any defensive role they need. Again, he's just an analytical darling when it comes to the defensive side of the game, and although he doesn't put up crazy points, I think he'd be a great selection on a 3-year contract at $3 million a year. So now taking a look at this team, this is the Seattle Kraken lineup that I am projecting anyways. I think they've got a lot of good players in this list, quite a few RFAs, but these guys still have a little bit of time left, and of course, we definitely hit all of the requirements with this roster. So what do you guys think? I think they're projecting a really, really solid lineup here that could see some growth over the next season or two. And with guys like Tarasenko, Drouin, Duchesne, and Zucker, those guys are going to put up decent points. It's more just a matter of if they can all gel together. And of course, if they take on that mentality that the Vegas players did with, hey, we're the unwanted players of the NHL. Let's go out and prove to them that we are better than they thought. I think the Kraken are going to go really far as well, but the defense as well. The defense looks like it's got some potential. It's not the craziest defensive core ever, but there's definitely a solid top 4, and then the bottom two positions could get filled out by multiple guys here. So it's really a toss-up for who's going to go where, who's going to get selected, but again, Matt Murray, Chris Driedger, and Kaapo Kähkönen in net. I think Driedger and Kähkönen are pretty much guaranteed, and Matt Murray is a bit of a question mark for me, but again, let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you guys are thinking on the draft. I decided to go with more of I would say a bit more of a higher skilled lineup, but it is guys who still have potential and room to grow. There really weren't a lot of guys over the age of 30 on my roster here. You can see we got Joel Hanley and Matt Duchene. That's about it. Everybody else is 29 or younger. So yeah, I want to hear your guys' thoughts and comments below, and if you did enjoy it, make sure to go down below, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and hit that notification bell to never miss these uploads. But that's going to be it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Seattle Expansion Draft, and I will see you in the next one.